Today's podcast is brought to you by Audible. Get a free audiobook download and 30-day free trial at washingtech.com/book. Over 180,000 titles to choose from for your iPhone, Android, Kindle, or MP3 player.
Moving the needle. Welcome to the Washington Policy Podcast.
Curating communications, media, and tech policy news so you don't have to. News, interviews, everything you need without the axe to grind. It's the Washington Tech Policy Podcast with Joe Miller.
The Justice Department approves Charter's acquisition of Time Warner Cable. Intel announces plans to lay off 12,000, and Brian Woolfolk is my guest. The Department of Justice has approved Charter Communications' $88.4 billion acquisition of Time Warner Cable and Bright House Networks. The FCC has an order on circulation among the commissioners also supporting the merger, which is expected to pass tomorrow. But the merger does contain conditions intended to protect consumers and competition. The merged company, New Charter, will be prohibited from punishing or thwarting the efforts of programmers to offer their content directly to online video distributors, or OVDs, such as Netflix or Hulu. Importantly, New Charter will be prohibited from implementing usage-based pricing and data caps. It will also be prohibited from charging interconnection fees to other smaller cable companies as well as OVDs. Intel has announced it plans to lay off 12,000 workers, representing about 11% of its workforce. So this will bring Intel's workforce below the 100,000 mark. Intel has been struggling because of the declining PC business, which has been the microprocessing company's bread and butter. The company still made $2 billion in profits last quarter, but it plans to focus more of its growth strategy on its data center and Internet of Things businesses. The Authors Guild has run out of options in its lawsuit against Google for the tech giant's book scanning service, Google Books. As you know, Google Books shows scanned snippets of published books. So if I go to Google Books and search for How to Win Friends and Influence People, a scanned version of the book comes up, but some of the pages are missing. Still, if I'm writing something and looking for a quote from the book, it's often right there. The Authors Guild has argued that Google Books provides an illegal free substitute and hampers publishers' derivative rights, their right to earn revenue from searches. The Second Circuit Court of Appeals rejected the Authors Guild's arguments last New Year's Eve, saying the Authors Guild was seeking an unprecedented judicial expansion of the fair use doctrine. The Authors Guild appealed to the Supreme Court, but last week the Supreme Court denied cert ending this particular lawsuit. You can find a full discussion of this case, including a summary of the fair use doctrine, at Ars Technica. At the Aspen Security Forum in London last week, James Comey, director of the FBI, said the agency paid gray hat hackers more than what his salary will be over the next, quote, 7 years and 4 months, I'm sure, end quote, to hack into one of the San Bernardino shooter's iPhone. So the Hacker News calculated the FBI spent at least $1.3 million to hack into the phone, since Comey's salary was $183,000 last year. But CBS News had reported that an unidentified source at the FBI said nothing useful came from the FBI's search of the iPhone. So basically, we're talking about $1.3 million down the drain. It would be great if the FBI had its own gray hat hackers on staff, but the best hackers are going to work for tech companies, and in many cases earning more, significantly more, than the FBI director's $183,000 salary. So would you rather be a hacker at the FBI or at a tech company? The Hacker News has more. Citing documents filed in a Privacy International lawsuit, Ars Technica reports the UK's intelligence agencies MI5, MI6, and GCHQ are spying on millions of innocent people indiscriminately. The documents seem to show the UK is collecting bulk data sets on private communications with doctors and lawyers, financial data, purchases, essentially anything and everything. Some of the data pertains to people who are no longer living. Ars reports the UK has been doing this since 2001, and that there is a lack of appropriate safeguards to prevent officials from abusing people with the data they collect. The UK Parliament is currently debating a bill that will legitimate this bulk data collection. It's called the Investigatory Powers Bill, and some observers worry it doesn't do enough to protect against the possibility of a demagogue coming into power at some point in the future. The UK's practices seem antithetical to the rest of Europe. The EU has been pushing the Obama administration for better protection of Europeans' data entering the US. Mr. Obama spoke at a trade show in Hanover, Germany Monday, urging Europeans to recognize that the threat of terrorism is real. The president attempted to persuade those who attended the gathering that even though the US does not have a legislative privacy framework, it offers sufficient privacy protection to Europeans and Americans alike. Meanwhile, U.S. National Intelligence Director James Clapper stated at a Christian Science Monitor breakfast meeting Monday morning that it is essentially impossible for U.S. spies to ascertain how many innocent Americans' data have been included in bulk data collections. You tell me. The Electronic Frontier Foundation filed a lawsuit against the Justice Department in the Northern District of California last week to compel the DOJ to reveal whether it has ever used secret court orders via the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court to force tech companies to decrypt their users' communications. EFF sees this as another angle the U.S. government could potentially exploit if they are otherwise unable to access device data. The advocacy group says the public should know about secret mechanisms law enforcement officials use to access encrypted data. Apparently in response to the FCC's proposed set-top box rules, Comcast announced last week it will be partnering with Roku and Samsung to provide cable programming without the need for a set-top box. Currently, cable subscribers pay an average of $231 per year to cable companies to lease set-top boxes, so this new partnership would eliminate the need for a set-top box. However, Comcast did not reveal the criteria the company would use to select other set-top box partners. Apple released its transparency report last week showing 1,000 government requests for user data in the second half of 2015. The company complied with 82% of the requests. The Guardian has a full analysis. Finally, Canada has closed its anti-competitive investigation into Google. The investigation had gone on for 3 years, but only uncovered one anti-competitive practice. The Verge has more. Stay with us. For Washing Tech podcast listeners, Audible is offering a free audiobook download with a 30-day trial so you can check out their service. You can listen in your car, on the metro when it works, anywhere you are. How about The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg? You can download Power of Habit or another audiobook free by trying audible.com. Sign up for your free audiobook and 30-day trial today at washingtech.com/book. My guest today is Brian Woolfolk, who's going to shed some light for us on the FCC's proposed set-top box rules and all the uproar surrounding them coming from the cable lobby. Brian is a principal at Swan Creek Strategies and is a seasoned attorney with over 20 years of government relations and congressional investigations experience. He represents a broad array of clients with matters before Congress and federal agencies. Brian also counsels clients involved in high-profile congressional investigations. In addition, he advises clients on compliance with federal election, lobbying disclosure, and gift ban regulations. Prior to his tenure in private practice, Brian served as a Democratic counsel on the US House Judiciary Committee and advised members and staff on constitutional, environmental, antitrust, criminal justice, and investigative issues. Brian also serves as legislative counsel to Congressman Bobby Scott of Virginia, currently the ranking member of the Education and Workforce Committee. Brian Woolfolk. Brian, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
And back in January, the FCC announced a new set of rules intended to open up competition in the set-top box market. Currently, each of us pays about $232 per year to lease our set-top boxes from our cable and broadband providers. The proposed rules are going to change all that by opening up the set-top box market to companies like Apple, Google, and TiVo. The White House is on board with the plan despite opposition from the cable industry, including the producers of hit shows like The Walking Dead, even though the Writers Guild and the writers of The Walking Dead support opening up set-top box competition. Opponents are claiming the new rules would harm privacy and promote the piracy of copyrighted material. So we know what this could mean for consumers, a greater say in what they're actually getting for that $232 a year. And we also know the implications of what the new rules could mean for carriers, which earn $20 billion in net profits from the leasing of set-top boxes. So the battle between consumer groups and carriers is well underway, but these new rules could also have an effect on competition, not just among the device makers, but also among the content producers themselves. Brian, can you tell us a little bit about how shows like The Walking Dead or Real Housewives got carried in their first season? What does it take to get a TV network on cable?
The pursuit of getting a show carried on cable or broadcast depends on which medium your show will be carried on. Broadcast networks require significantly more viewership than cable networks require based on the business models of the two entities. Broadcast networks are based on advertising models, which require significant viewership. Millions of people have to watch it every week. And because those shows are based on advertising models and advertisers expecting a certain amount of eyeballs to be watching the show each time it's viewed. Cable networks are also based a lot of times on advertising models to some extent, but the real basis of their economic model is subscriber fees. So these subscriber fees are what people pay in their cable bills every month, and this will be anywhere from 6 cents per subscriber. So you can multiply that times 100 million, if assuming the cable network has wide distribution, or as much as possibly $7.50 per subscriber, which you would expect from an ESPN. So the model dictates which outlet will carry your show. The problem with this model is that both of those models are very limited. You have on the one end the broadcast network, which requires a lot of views and therefore has to focus on content where the most amount of people will watch. Not necessarily the best product, not necessarily something that you really like, but something where the most people and the most households will watch it. Then you have a cable model, in which companies have been able to get fat and lazy because they get paid every month the bulk of their money, whether you watch their shows or not. A lot of people have talked to me over the years and said, I never watched the Outdoor Channel. There are people that never watch Fox News or ESPN, but they pay for it every month in their cable bill because you don't have a choice. Now, when people are getting that money every month, whether you watch it or not, it usually makes it so people can run reruns of old shows. A lot of people watch cable and they say, well, gee, we have hundreds of channels on cable, but I still find myself channel flipping and not being able to find anything on TV that I want to see. The model is a non-competitive model, so you're only going to get fed a very limited amount of product, because the other big secret to this, and one of the biggest difficulties that independents and diverse programmers have in dealing with systematic issues that work against them, is that the cable companies own most of the networks on their systems. So Comcast Universal, of course, owns all of the NBC channels, all of the MSNBCs. They own Bravo and the Real Housewives franchise, for example. So, of course, when they own these things, they have a disincentive to have you come on and compete with them on their cable system. So there is significant funneling that encourages these large incumbent companies to discourage any new programming, especially any new independent programming that they are not at the right side of the food chain in. And therein lies the rub on the entire industry and the need to present different ways for programmers to be able to access the marketplace. Set-top box is one of those avenues.
And what percentage of content created and produced by minorities and women do you think has fallen through the cracks during the current regime?
That's a great question. There are thousands of minority producers, filmmakers. There are thousands of independent filmmakers that are out there. I mean, imagine the world before YouTube. Before YouTube, and before the advances in technology that have made it easy, where everyone basically carries around a video recording device, a microphone, and a computer that has editing equipment, and the ability to upload all of this to various websites, whether it be Facebook or YouTube or Twitter or whatever is the case. And we literally have millions of filmmakers in this country. And if you look at the quality end of things, where people really spend significant time and have series and higher quality content, the numbers range in the tens of thousands, maybe the hundreds of thousands. So the percentage is very minuscule of those shows that make it from the pilot level to getting distribution on cable or broadcast. We can't. I would, if you made me guess a percentage, I would probably say something along the 99%, 99.9% of content never gets full exposure.
And how would the new set-top box rules help promote video competition? How would they change that landscape?
Well, it's really an unintended consequence of opening up the set-top box. When Congress in 1996 in the Telecom Act required that there be competition among set-top box owners, and when Congress in 1996 required that there be competition among set-top box makers, and ensuring that competition would allow the signals to be used by various set-top box manufacturers, they never envisioned an over-the-top market. They never really envisioned an internet exploding like it has 20 years later, and video technology expanding like it has, and editing technology expanding like it was. So this is really an unintended consequence of 1996. But with competition usually breeds innovation. And what you have now is you have a vibrant over-the-top market where significant amounts of people look to YouTube, look to Facebook, look to these many different non-cable venues for video content before they even turn on their cable TV. Mm-hmm. So Congress never intended this, but technology has moved us in a direction where Netflix and YouTube and other programming services, Hulu, are starting to be a part of your video viewing experience, not just an ancillary part where you look at another device and pull things up, but it's a central part of your viewing ecosystem. So because of that, and because of the advances in technology, it takes nothing to integrate the over-the-top services with the cable services. They can easily be integrated, and people are able to look at both systems in a seamless process without turning from one device to another. Smart TVs have this technology. Set-top box can have this technology. And the technology is there to look at over-the-top just as easily as you do a cable network. So when you have over-the-top, and you basically have the web as a gatekeeper, and the web is open, everyone can get onto the web, as opposed to having to go through a gatekeeper such as one of the big networks or one of the big cable companies. It opens up a completely different world and to programmers and creators of content.
And Alfred Liggins of TV One is making the opposite argument. Am I correct?
He's making an opposite argument. I haven't really seen Alfred Liggins engage from the what does it do for content creators that are not currently on cable or broadcast. Mm-hmm.
So it's mostly from the perspective of networks that are already carried, like TV One.
Yeah, he makes the case from TV One's perspective, which I can respect that case. I would prefer that they made the case a little more genuinely. TV One is currently able to survive and to make money because their basis is in subscriber fees. Their advertising was so poor last year based on their annual report that they had to, I believe, give some money back to their advertisers based on their annual report from last year as it was submitted to the SEC. TV One, if you look at the programming at TV One, and they're working to, based on public reports, they're working to do better with regards to their programming. But, any given day you turn to TV One, and it's heavily based on their 24-hour schedule is heavily based on reruns of shows like Different World and Sanford and Son. And this is some very limited content. But if you're able to have a stable business model from doing that, more power to you. The challenge that a lot of people have is that they yearn for better content, and they yearn for more content. The only way to do that is through competition and opening up the marketplace to other vendors. I mean, it's the equivalent of going to the mall and only being able to buy Levi's when you have interest in getting all types of other types of clothing.
So what now, these rules in practice, these proposed rules, what do they actually do?
The rules are very narrow. The rules simply provide for regulations for cable companies to provide their signals to other companies that create quote unquote set-top boxes. That's all of the impact of the rules. So
is this like cable card?
Well, it's very different from cable card. Cable card required an additional significant coordination with the local cable company, which of course the cable companies weren't providing a lot of that. It was limited to one-way programming, so you couldn't do video on demand and things of that nature with the cable company if you chose to have cable card. And it was so limited and arduous a process that very few people ended up being able to do it. And the technology has outgrown cable card too. So this is an extension of that same attempt by the FCC to implement regulations laws that were passed in 1996 in the Telecom Act. But it's a lot more consistent with the current technologies.
And we've seen many times in the past where a set of regulations has had unintended consequences. Since the net neutrality rules were passed, we've seen more zero rating practices. John Bergmeyer discussed this on episode 31. And the net neutrality rules do nothing to prevent edge providers from picking and choosing which shows it carries. To give you a personal example, Apple and Google will carry this podcast essentially with no questions asked. Other platforms, though, have a selection process. They choose whom they will carry. What can policymakers put on the table during the comment period to discourage unnecessary gatekeeping when it comes to which shows get carried?
I think people have to ask those questions in this comment period with this set-top box proceeding, but I don't think it stops there. I think that there are statutory protections that need to be in place to strengthen the FCC's hand and guarding against these uncompetitive practices. I think that there are issues such as data caps, which have the potential to disrupt over-the-top video, and we need to figure out ways to ensure that that's a competitive marketplace. The set-top box proceeding is only one part of many parts that are necessary to finally get to a creative market, to a competitive marketplace, in which one gatekeeper company is not able to dictate what type of content we get. And that is a big fear. I mean, if you see now with regard to data caps, there are certain areas around the country that are already starting to implement data caps with plans from a number of the large cable and telecom companies to expand this eventually all around the country. Data caps are not a problem now for most people at home, but as we expand in video and as we expand in markets like these over-the-top markets that are out there and ready to get in and get in the mix, that all can be shut down by data caps that prevent people from using as much data as they would like to use. It becomes, imagine if we have data caps at home and people that stream Netflix and YouTube and 30 other streaming channels that will grow from the set-top box movement, all of a sudden they're getting hit by data caps 3 days, 4 days into the month because they've hit a data cap. and are getting charged some exorbitant fees beyond for downloading too much information. These are real challenges to come, and something that we've got to keep our eye on and continue the advocacy. Set-top boxes that's only one of many facets of this in order to maintain competitiveness.
And it seems like, as you said earlier, there's on one side, there's set of policies that seem to be focused just on the businesses that currently exist, like the channels that are already being carried on the one hand, or just looking at the type of traffic that we have now and going forward with data caps without consideration for the future for traffic, and then without considering what's going to happen with content for folks who actually want to get online, who want to get carried, who haven't been carried yet. So it's just very interesting the way it's developing. I've talked to fellow podcasters, and they're like, we're fine. We've never had a problem with T-Mobile. I mean, we've never had a problem, so it's not really something that we're going to worry about. We're just going to kind of double down and focus on our market share and building our markets and building our audience, and that there's not much we can do about what's happening in DC. Do you think that's the how would you think of that as a business owner, as an entrepreneur?
Well, unfortunately, consumers and small businesses are both horribly represented in Washington compared to how much they should be represented. So you, of course, have groups that do an incredible job of advocating on behalf of these organizations and these constituencies. But it's always frustrating to many of us that do some of this advocacy when we see individuals and small business owners and they don't get the connection between this regulatory process and their business, because their business can be eliminated tomorrow with some of these practices. If you don't have open access to the marketplace, you can't sell your wares. And of course, there are always fights going on at the FCC, the FTC, and in Congress regarding tweaking this marketplace and the access to the marketplace. It's a constant vigilance that has to be waged against these moves by the incumbent companies. And for these businesses, I can't say it enough, and I can't say it loudly enough or articulately enough. They have to be at the table. They get abused, and that's unfortunately what normally happens.
Brian, it's been a privilege having you on the show, so thanks once again for joining me. I just want to ask you a few more questions, and then we'll close. Sound like a plan?
Sure. Great.
All right. On this podcast, we like to talk about policy and entrepreneurship, but also about what makes successful people like you tick. Tell us, Brian, what are some habits, tactics, and apps that you use every day to stay on top of your game?
Well, my practice is very data-driven and very news-driven. So the apps that I benefit most from are news apps and social media. So Twitter and Facebook and Instagram, but also breaking news, the breaking news app, and the newspaper and apps that provide up to the minute news and political and regulatory news. That gives me the ability to track multiple issues at multiple times, and to stay at the cutting edge of what's happening and be able to react to what's happening. There was a time long ago when people could read a newspaper a day or two later and digest the story at a convenient time, but that time is long gone. Something happens in the news, responses have to be made within minutes. And so that's a key part of what I have to do with my practice and as far as apps that I depend on. Also, just in general, I've become in the last year or so pretty paperless. So I take notes on my iPhone. I, of course, use the email and video functions significantly. I use spreadsheets, and I've started working on and editing documents from my phone. So I'm mobile and always accessible to my entire office and files. So that's, utilization of those technologies is getting easier and easier. and I take full advantage of it.
And tell us the name of a book that you read recently that you're recommending to basically everyone you meet.
A book I've read, I enjoy reading books about history, bios, books about African American history are of particular interest to me. I read a book about Alexander Dumas, the great general in France. The book was written, it's called The Black Count by Tom Rice. And this is a book about Alexander Dumas. Now, Alexander Dumas, his son, was the great writer, wrote Three Musketeers, The Count of Monte Cristo. But Alexander Dumas's father was born in Haiti. He was enslaved in Haiti as a kid. His father was a French nobleman that brought him back to France, raised him in France, and he became a great general in France, fought alongside Napoleon and some of the Napoleonic Wars, and was one of the most revered generals in history in Europe. And just reading about his story was so fascinating, and I've turned a few people onto that book, and they've enjoyed it significantly.
So thanks again, Brian, for joining me. Do you have any final ideas you'd like to leave with the audience before we close, and where can folks find you online?
Best way to reach me is through Twitter, and it's Brian, B-R-I-A-N-P, as in Paul, Woolfolk, W-O-O-L-F-O-L-K. And the final thought I think I would leave with everyone is just to stay engaged, stay woke on these technology issues. The large companies are cutting the pie every single day, and they have armies of people cutting the pie. And they're able to get away with that because a lot of times we aren't paying attention and we aren't watching what's going on. Please go to unlockthebox.com and follow the set-top box issue, but also develop your own opinions. Comment at the FCC and let your elected officials know what you think about these issues.
You've been listening to Brian Woolfolk, owner of Swan Creek Strategies. Swan Creek is a government relations firm that provides advice and counsel before government agencies. Brian, thank you so much for joining me. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
That concludes episode 36 of the podcast. Thanks so much for listening, and be sure to give us a rating and review in iTunes. Will ya? Will ya? Your ratings and reviews are essential to keep the show going. You can also sign up for the Data Points newsletter, which is our weekly summary of the media and tech-related research you'll want to keep an eye on. We curate that for you all in one place so you can see the latest data come out regularly rather than driving yourself crazy at the last minute looking for that research you need 5 minutes before your next meeting. The sign up for that is at washingtech.com. Thanks again to all of you for listening, and I will see you back here next week. Take care.
Thanks for listening to the Washing Tech Policy Podcast. You've been briefed.